Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable and lovely in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So our reading from Jeremiah this week comes from a God frustrated with people who seemingly are unrepentant and who do not know how to do good. The whole of the text of Jeremiah reflects on God's passion for an intimate and loving relationship with the entire human community. God longs for us to come into righteousness, like a parent watching a child bumbling around, seemingly having absorbed no lessons at all that he, she, or they strove to teach. And one might look around at society today and decide that we are indeed an unruly bunch in need of coming back into the fold. But lest we get all self-righteous and think that we know what's best for others and look down on all those less godly than we are reminded in the gospel by Jesus addressing the Pharisees and the legal experts positioned here as Jesus' antagonists, who present the challenge about what one eats and with whom. These are key issues in drawing and maintaining socio-religious boundaries. Don't we humans just love to divide ourselves, hoping we know what's best, what's right, maybe out of fear that we ourselves are not loved or good enough? Yet we're all loved by God. Jesus welcomes sinners to his table and tells stories to refute those righteous folks who would uphold proper society with rules about who is in and who is out. Which of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. When he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who need no repentance. And the same is true with the woman who looks after the coin. Jesus is teaching us about God's attitude toward us. There aren't many shepherds out there who would leave the 99 and go searching for the one. But God will go after us. God is the shepherd. We are the sheep. Now, I talk to y'all sometimes about Reverend Irvin Milton, who is chair of the Southern Conference of the UCC Church and Ministry Committee. And when he preached the installation of Reverend Eddie Weathers earlier this year, he's our associate conference minister, Reverend Milton reminded many of us there about the role of a pastor. And I'm paraphrasing. He said, "See, some folk get mad at me for not doing the things that they think I should do as a pastor. But they forget that I am not the shepherd. I am the sheepdog. It is my job to try to round people up for God, to teach them what I can, but I can't heal them. I can't cause them to come back into the fold. They have to do the work to meet God." And if that's true, church, I'll do the best I can as a sheepdog for Jesus without nipping at your heels. But despite the humor, the lesson is there. God shows up first, seeking us out, asking us to come back to God's way. But it is up to each one of us to follow God's invitation. When I worked at the Institute for Human Services in Honolulu as a chaplain in homelessness services, I was embedded in the severe and persistent mental illness case management program, working to house those who were most vulnerable, usually those dealing with chronic homelessness, medical fragility, addiction, mental health issues. We had mantras like, "Don't work harder than your clients," reminding us to dial it back if we went after people trying to help them when they were uninterested or too much in their addiction to act on the help. We had to learn to only work with those who were willing to do the work. Because if we spend all our time on the ones who are out in the park trying to chase them down to comply with their programs so they wouldn't lose access to resources or worse, rights to their children or an opportunity for housing, then that meant that we wouldn't have time to work with the other folks we had on our caseloads who were ready and willing to do the work. We'd send our outreach teams out to remind folks in the park that the resources were there when they were ready. But when they were ready was between them and God. We can't chase people down into wellness. And as our clinical director, Jerry Coffey, would often remind us, just because we're called to compassion does not mean we're called to abuse. If you remember one thing from my whole time with y'all, please remember that. Just because we're called to compassion does not mean we're called to abuse. All right? Sometimes people are so wounded by the world that they can't help but lash out at a helping hand. And you know what? This parable is not telling you to show up for that abuse. No, you just have to give them over to God. And when they are ready to heal, listen to the expressions of love and joy Jesus uses to describe that moment. The shepherd lays that sheep on his shoulders and rejoices and says, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." There will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who need no repentance. So it was at the homeless shelter. We hoped against hope that folks who had been in our programs and fallen out would decide to return. But it had to be up to them. As a chaplain, I was part of the wraparound services in the Housing First program. That means basically that you give people housing first as opposed to trying to get them housing ready with medical treatment and recovery and things like that, because these are basically the folks who were never going to make it through those hoops because of the constellation of issues. We partnered with the community psychology program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa to study the program's effectiveness. And as part of that evaluation, we used a research tool called Photo Voice. We basically gave participants in the program cameras and asked them to document their first year moving into housing. And then this culminated in an exhibit for a month at Honolulu Hale, or City Hall. And the participants wrote descriptions for the photos they selected for the visit, including, "The way I see it, this transition to housing is like being on a ship that sailed into a really bad storm. I was shipwrecked, and I had to swim to shore. And there was housing first. It sent me back home, and here I am. Life was a big turmoil. I had been homeless for almost 15 years. Or somebody else who wrote, "When we are in fight or flight, we can't do spiritual work or take part in nutritional or long-term care. You had to have the housing first." Someone walking through the exhibit of photographs observed to me, "Everyone in this program is older. The youngest participant I'm seeing is 35. Now, we did have younger folks in this program, but they rarely made it to the life skills group that had the Photo Voice project, and many of them lapsed back into their drugs." And I thought about the observation about the age, and I talked about it with one of our case managers, who herself had struggled for years to kick a heroin habit. And she said, "Sometimes you just have to live a certain amount of time on the streets, struggling before you're finally ready to give it up." So it is with the third parable that you didn't hear in this chapter, the prodigal son. All are stories of things that are lost. A sheep, a coin, a child. They all need love to be found, but only the sheep and the coin were sought out. The father had to wait for his son to come home. It's good to remember what is in our power and what is not. Hear this testimony from the father of an alcoholic. "I came to Al-Anon because I had an alcoholic child. I felt miserable because my child was in trouble and frustrated because I couldn't seem to do anything about it. I also felt angry that he lied and took advantage of me. As a father, I saw myself as the fixer. I provided wisdom, guidance, advice, lots and lots of advice. I minimized problems with humor, provided money, and showed disapproval. The effect of my actions put roadblocks in his path to recovery because they gave him no room to breathe, no opportunity to help himself and rebuild his self-esteem. Every time he turned around, I was there to help, or so I thought, by offering what I thought was a better way. We always had long phone chats, which used to consist of him telling me his problems and giving him advice because I knew that if he would just listen, all would be well. In truth, my advice, money, and disapproval did nothing but injure him. In effect, I was telling him that he did not have the skills necessary to make his own decisions. I was demeaning him, not helping him. However, by using the tools I learned at Al-Anon meetings, I changed the nature of our conversations. Instead of giving advice, I gave empathy. Instead of telling him what to do, I told him I was sorry to hear about his latest problem and let him solve it for himself. Then a remarkable thing happened. After several weeks of these conversations, he said to me, I really enjoy these talks we've been having lately. They mean a lot to me. And at around the same time, he began his own program of recovery. My new approach did not cause him to recover or even help him recover, but it did remove some obstacles that I had been putting in his way. In essence, my script had changed, and therefore our relationship changed. Through this program, I learned that if I take care of myself and treat myself with respect, then I will be in a better position to help my son in a way that acknowledges that there is a real person, a loving person inside my alcoholic son. I finally realized that he is an adult and therefore has the right to solve his own problems and to live his own life. As a result, in addition to being my son, he once again became a very close and dear friend. Now, when it comes to people, there is agency, and that's different from the coin or the sheep. Sometimes objects slip through the cracks. Sheep just get distracted and wander off. Both need searching out. But the prodigal son did things deliberately to destroy his life. And that father had to remember what was within his power and what was not. Sometimes the best we can do is provide space for the other person to heal and to come to terms with God. And so they can find their way back with God's help. It is hard to watch. It's hard not to try and fix it. And maybe sometimes we think, well, can't that pastor, chaplain, case manager go get them and fix them? It's not how it works. The thing is, each of us has to answer God's invitation on our own. To remember that we are loved and worth saving. If someone you love is struggling, throwing more advice at them or hoping someone else will go fix it isn't really a great way forward. Simply giving them over to God and praying for them is all we can do. Sometimes from a distance, or sometimes with occasional reminders that we know they're struggling and that you're here for them. That's how it is with God and us. God is also praying and waiting for us to come back to God. And there's a difference between prayerful, hopeful waiting and a search party. Our job is the former. God's job is the latter. God is always there, the good shepherd searching after us, hoping we might return to God's ways. And we can be prayerfully waiting with open arms, glad to welcome them home. May it be so.